to talk about risk. And it's not a subject a lot of people like to talk about, but it's necessary. And it really is a way to really have a deeper understanding of your relationship with riding a motorcycle. So we'll wait for a few more people to come. Got 5. Cool. While you guys are waiting, and we get a few more people in. Yesterday I had a ADV student, or dual sport or off-road student. We went out to the forest around here, and yesterday was the first time I've dropped my Tiger in a couple years, and it was a common drop. We were turning around in the dirt, and I was doing a stand-up tight U-turn, and I just was in the wrong gear, and I stalled the bike, and bam, down it went. Just stepped off the bike, which is another skill you do need to learn if you're going to be riding off-road, is sort of how to fall. And I just instinctively stepped off the bike and let it go. 500 and plus pounds, I'm not going to be able to keep upright. Hey, Randy. Hey, Suzanne. Wait for a few more folks. Assume you guys are like at lunch or something. If you think that this noon Wednesday time is not so good, let me know. If you like it, let me know. If you think that like 11:30 would be better, because I remember when I was working full time in the cubicle world, that the lunchtime was kind of strict. And so, hey Karen, if you have any feedback on that, we've got quite a few people who are either coming or interested. I think 101 were either coming or interested. And so that's good. That's partly why I'm doing the Facebook Live. It's because it seems easier for people. It's sort of, they can stumble upon it and they get a little notification, as opposed to having to log into Zoom. So I understand that. So once again, I'm broadcasting from my car remotely because the bandwidth in my house is just ridiculous still. Again, knock on wood, we're supposed to get some real high-speed internet, in which case I can do this in the comfort of my home. But there's some other guy next to me who's doing his schoolwork from his car. But bandwidth should be decent. It looks like it is. Okay, how many people we got here? 16. Yeah, we're at 12:02. Let me get my notes. So, what is there to talk about when it comes to risk? It's planning. Well, first off, let's state the obvious. Motorcycling is risky, but then, now you start to argue, well, so is, fill in any number of things, skiing, walking downstairs. I know a lot of people that walk downstairs and fall and hurt themselves, but you have to keep in mind that the ratio, the per capita number of motorcycle riders versus people that walk up and down stairs, that's really the statistical thing you got to remember. So riding a motorcycle is risky. So the question is then, why do we do it? Because none of us have a death wish, nobody I know. So why do we choose to do it? Well, again, stating the obvious here, we choose to do it because we understand that the risks are worth the reward. And I've been riding for 40 years, and I still find that's the case. But the parts of it, though, that a lot of people don't consider, that's what we're going to talk about. And that is things that you may be doing or choices you may be making that really don't jive with the risks that you actually are willing to accept or tolerate. And sometimes it's just a matter of having somebody go, just question exactly what you're doing. I'm not talking about should you ride a motorcycle like your parents might do or your spouse or friends. I'm talking about specific things. And we'll talk about that. Hey, Jim. Good to see everybody here. I appreciate, before I get right into it, appreciate those of you who shoot me $10 or so, $20, and that really helps things. I've been keeping track of everybody, those of you who are donors, and certainly my Patreon patrons, they're my besties. And, I'm going to keep you on the list of people to contact when I've got special things to get sent out. I am working on another book, and a student from the parking lot course that we had last Sunday gave me a great idea, because she was looking for a compilation of sort of scenarios that would help her to understand if she's in this situation, what would be the best thing to do. And I realized that I have all those street strategies columns that I did for Motorcycle Consumer News, and they're sitting there, and they're not in a book form or in some kind of form. Dave Huff did, who was the previous writer of the column at MCN, and he did do that, and he has a book called Street Strategies. And it's a great type of format because it's anecdotal, and it tells a story, and oftentimes it'd be something that would say, oh yeah, that's happened to me, and then have a helpful tips about how to handle that so that it doesn't become a bigger issue than it might have been. And how does that relate to risk? Well, it's just, again, it's the idea of learning, sort of pre-programming solutions in your head before you ever need them. So a lot of people visualize. That's what racers do. They'll visualize so that they're actually training without being behind the handlebars. And you can do that just even imagining your commute to work and knowing the likely pitfalls, whether it's side roads or intersections or people not paying attention on their phones. What would you do? That's the question. What would you do? And that's what the benefit of those sorts of articles are. So back to risk. We accept the risk of riding. And the question is, do we really? Do you know what the risks of riding really are? And one example of a perception of risk is that I field all the time is the concept of riding on a racetrack, and that's where the track day conversation comes in. Because when you suggest that somebody come to a track day, and a lot of you folks are listening to me now have come to the track days. Hey, Suzanne, and Andrew, glad you could make it. They always say, "Well, I don't want to crash my bike," and the fact is that there's a complex answer to that, and one is that you can just be facetious and say, "Well, don't crash your bike then," and because hey, Laura, the simple answer to it is that it's a safer place to ride on the racetrack because you don't have all those things I just mentioned on your commute, intersections and texting teens and that sort of thing. And the surface is always clean. If it isn't, we stop everything and we clean it up. So think about that. The environment is the safest place you can ride. Now, why do people crash? Well, that's, again, comes into the idea of how much risk are you willing to accept. Because it's quite easy to ride around a racetrack on a track day and not come anywhere near the limits of your tires and your ability in your bike. And you'd have a great time and you'd learn a lot. But as we get more and more confident, our perception of risk changes. We get a feeling that that risk is less because our skills are greater. And there's some truth to that. And the thing, though, to keep in mind is just that you have the control of perceiving that the risk is still there. Gravity still is present on a racetrack. So when you are considering doing a track day or just considering where you ride, it's easy to think that, oh, I'm going to ride get out of the city and I'm going to ride out in the rural areas and I'm going to have a great time. Yeah, but there are risks out there too, and they're just different risks. And so that's where you need to sort of assess that and understand what the risks are. So again, this is stuff again, but my job is to bring consciousness to what you know, and to have people sort of think about it. So one thing about risk that oftentimes I use as a way for people to understand the seriousness of needing to consider risk is that it's not only about you. The risk you take is risking others as well. So if you tend to be somebody who's an adrenaline seeker and you get out and you find it on your motorcycle and you go out and you take a lot of risks, particularly on the street, the consequences are quite high of a crash into an oncoming lane, an oncoming car, or a guardrail, or any number of things that's in the street. You're going to get hurt if you fall. Chances are, there's a lot more to hit. So then on the racetrack, I'll throw that in. Yeah, Suzanne's looking forward to a track day. But it also affects other people around you. You may say, well, yeah, I could crash into another car, but I'm just a motorcycle and I'm not going to do much damage. They're inside a vehicle, and that's not true either. Think about even at 30 miles an hour, your motorcycle, which is 500, 800 pounds, being propelled into the side of a car. That's not nothing. Right? So there's that. But what I really want to address is the risk that you take is also overlays onto your loved ones. So again, I don't want to be a bummer about this, and you understand this. You're all adults. But again, I want to just bring it up to the surface. I want to talk about this thing it's something that nobody wants to talk about. But let's go on to the next little topic about which is risk tolerance, because some people are, they ride and they're really careful, and the way they ride, and they don't take a lot of risks. Curiously, oftentimes they perceive that wrong. That say riding slow is safer. Well, in some ways it is, but in other ways it's not, because you're maybe not melding with traffic very well. Also, riding slowly can also be considered riding timidly, and that's not good. And that's going to really not help you when you need to be a very proficient rider. So if you're always riding careful and when in reality you're riding timid, that's something you want to address and be aware of. Other people are, like I mentioned before, are adrenaline seekers, and I have known people that do that, and I'll find that that's common for, younger men, sure, but it's not just men at all. It's just people that really like the rush of being on a motorcycle, and oftentimes that kind of speed comes with that, or more extreme cornering. Hey, Eric Tro's here. Good to see you, buddy. Sean Russell's here. Sean, hope you're okay, buddy. That was a really nasty crash you had at the track. Racing. I do want to talk about racing and versus a track day. So the risk tolerance thing is the adrenaline thing. Oftentimes people are going to be driven beyond the limits of their ability, and certainly the environment. If you're really seeking the thrill is what your priority is. The problem with that is that even if you're the best rider out there, I'm talking about skills, physical skills, MotoGP level rider, you won't last the day if you try to ride, beyond the limits of the environment. Somebody's going to pull out in front of you. They're not going to expect you to be going that fast, and you did it to yourself, right? So, which isn't to say you just dawdle around. There are definitely places that I'll go out and I'll let it rip, but they're very selective, and I'm lucky because I can leave my front door and I can be right in the twisties. So I understand the problems about living in cities and suburbs. I used to live in Cambridge, and so I do understand that. One thing you can do is, if you have my book, even if you don't have my book, by the way, it is available in print again, also online. You can get on my website, ridinginthezone.com, you can get a PDF version of it. But I'm going to let you screenshot this thing. This is my risk tolerance. Let me get it here so you can see it. Risk tolerance sort of test. This for yourself. Get my fingers out of the way. Oh, it's over here. I'm going backwards. There. How about that? And sort of circle the things. Circle the things that. Well, I should say what your answer is for each category, and then add it up. I come up with an 18 for me, so I'm definitely in the low risk category. So I'm going to tell you on the track and on the street, really. But if you've ridden with me on the track, I don't go slow. So I'm riding well within my limits and my equipment, and I'm well protected. We'll talk about that too. And so the risk and managing the risk. The nice thing about that little drill or that little worksheet is that it can sort of make you realize just what risks you're taking, and it's not a judgment. Riding at night. If you ride at night, just understand the risks are higher than when you ride during the daylight. And so just understand that if you can adjust, if you need to adjust any of your behavior to match the level of risk acceptance and tolerance that you're willing to, that it has to match your risk acceptance. If you're not willing to accept, that high level of risk, if you come up with a 38 or 40 sort of score, it just tells you you're kind of in the scale of sort of risk, you're kind of in the high end, and you might want to make some changes. So that's just, again, it's something that gets people to think about, risk. Now, the environment that you ride in, as I mentioned a little bit before, it matters very much. So the risks that you take, there's one friend of mine who was commuting on Route 128, which is the beltway around Boston, and he ended up, every day he did it. So the risk exposure was high for him, which is to say that he was out in a risky scenario every day to go to work. So, and if anybody's driven or ridden on 128, you know what it's like. I mean, it's just like any crazy beltway. People trying to rush to get to work or rush to get home. And he ended up, getting into a crash from somebody, based on somebody doing something really stupid and erratic. And after that, he said, "Oh, I think I'm going to have to give up riding." I'm like, really? Because just understand the risks that you took were, particularly high. It doesn't mean you have to just stop commuting, It's just reduce the exposure to a particular risk, a risk that is a known risk. Now that sucks, right? If you want to commute to work, that's going to suck because you're going to have to make a major sacrifice. But that's just the sort of decision you have to make. And that's what it ultimately is. That's what this webinar is really about. Is really that you look with both eyes open at what you do and how you're riding. So that environment thing is huge. Risk exposure. Those of you who ride a lot, like in New England, 10,000 miles a year would be a lot. Considered a lot. You're in the saddle a lot, and that's a lot of risk exposure. And so you have to just keep that in mind. Which again isn't to say that you reduce your miles. It's just being aware of your exposure and what you're doing. If you're on the highway, here's another little myth that newer riders say, "Oh, I'm staying away from the highway because the speeds and all that." So I understand, but statistically, the highway is a safer place to ride. It's not as safe as a racetrack, but it's safer because everybody's going the same direction. The rules are fairly simple, and understand where the hazards lie in blind spots and entrance ramps and exit ramps. So consider just that. Where you ride is where you ride. But understand that the limitations of the environment are significant for everybody. Noticing maybe you can see my eyes a little better. So that aside, like for me, I am able to switch my brain from racetrack to street, and I'm a different person. I just ride completely different, and it's based on the environment. My skill level is the same. I could absolutely drag me out on the street. Why would I do that? I mean, I ride with people, oftentimes students of mine, and I tell them to slow down. Not often, but I really feel as though they're, for their ability, particularly, they're really not respecting the limits of the environment. So that's something you have to do yourself. Kyle's here, Ken, struggling with most. Now I'm just going to answer a couple of questions. No real answer. Like 9 out of 10 times people fall and get right up, cart away, and we're busy in the garage getting the pegs fixed up. Yeah. Oh, this is Kyle. Okay. I'll answer these things. I can answer these things after we're done here, and I'll go through. I won't do that right now. Hey, Matt's here. Love that everybody's here. Dave, Sojourner. I never know how to pronounce your name. Great to see you, though. So back to our topic. Here's a few things that, again, about managing the risk. And I talked a little bit about just now understanding the risk, what's your acceptance level, and then understanding what is a more risky lifestyle as a motorcyclist, and how you can maybe adjust that. Now, one thing, if you consider the most extreme example, and I'm going to bring up the racetrack again, is gear and ATGAT, whether it's ATGAT or if it's some level of gear, whether it's what you consider ATGAT and what I consider ATGAT, all the gear all the time, by the way, those of you who don't know that, can be very different. And that's something that when you do that little drill or the worksheet, and it says wear full gear all the time, and you might say, oh, always. And then I would ask, well, what's your idea of full gear? Oh, well, jeans and work boots and garden gloves and the open face helmet. All right, well, that's not exactly my idea of full gear, full coverage gear, which would be full face helmet, blah, blah, blah. It would be riding pants with armor. So that's one part of this. On the racetrack, I'm fully geared. I have an air vest, best helmet I can buy, full leathers, the best stuff. And why? Because the consequences of a crash are rather great, not because I'm going to hit something. The consequences of crashing on the street are my maybe arguably, but not really, is worse. The again, I mentioned before, if you crash on the street, running and getting run over by a car or a truck in the oncoming lane, or hitting a guardrail, oh my goodness, or any other number of things, a tree, you know the stories, is much greater on the racetrack if I fall. The reason I need all the protection mostly is because of the slide, because I could fall at 120 miles an hour, and so I'm not likely to hit anything because of the runoff that's designed into racetracks. And again, there are varying degrees of runoff, and you can even talk about that. Is some racetracks are more risky to ride than others for expert riders. You wouldn't race at let's say Palmer. If you've anybody who's been at Palmer Motorsports Park, because the runoff isn't that great, and people that go out and they're expert riders and they ride at race pace, we kind of talk to them, say, listen, you don't seem to be understanding the limits of this environment. If you crash at those speeds and with that level of aggression with your riding, the likelihood of you crashing is much greater. The consequences of that mishap would be very high, as opposed to maybe New Jersey Motorsports Park, where the runoff is just acres, and so now it's more of an issue of you tumbling. But again, we're fully geared up and we're ready to be sliding along the pavement at 100 miles an hour, and the gear is designed to do that. Out on the street, all right, hey, more times than not, you're going to make it home, no big deal. So I understand there are times when I have ridden in jeans, but it's usually just, to go get the bike inspected or something real nearby, because it's no big deal once you start doing it to just wear your gear and buy gear that suits you. If it's not something you like or that's uncomfortable, you're not going to wear it. So just keep in mind that your idea of gear and somebody else's, my idea of gear, your gear with an open face helmet, you are taking more risks of injury than I am with a full face helmet. All right, you're protecting your cranium as far as maybe a head injury, but the whole front of your face, I don't know how many times I've seen, the front of a full face helmet just completely obliterated. Thank goodness they had that on. So that's one example. Same with, like I say, jeans. A lot of people think jeans is adequate protection. It could be, but that's a risk that you're willing to take. So I'm not going to judge it, but I do want you to be aware of it, that you are taking more of a risk when you don't have the best gear. That makes sense. Don't put gear on and then get overly heated up and then getting distracted. Let's talk about modular helmets. This is something that a lot of people, I know a lot of you wear, I wear one, understand that modular helmets just won't hold up as well as a one-piece full-face helmet. Modular helmets we allow at the non-sport bike days. We don't at the upper level of the regular track days. The newer groups, that'll be fine. DOT is minimum. But understand that those things are, just by testing, they can come apart in certain crashes. And if you ride with it flipped up, which I do when I'm around town, understand now you're in a full open face helmet, and that can be a problem. So anybody saw that photo that's going around on Facebook of the guy with the stone stuck in his cheek? I think he was on a modular helmet and he had it flipped up at the time. A couple other things. These are going to be things about your machine. I had two people at the parking lot course last week that were dark siders. And those, if you don't know what that is, It's people with motorcycles with car tires on the back, and they do it for longevity because they ride many miles. Okay, so they would be going through tires 5 times a season if they were to have regular motorcycle tires. But I think some people do it and they shouldn't because they're not riding that much. The difference between the cost of a car tire and the cost of a motorcycle tire doesn't justify the potential problems with having a car tire on the back of a machine that's designed to have a certain type of tire on it, which is a motorcycle tire. One of the things that to consider is that you're using up more front tire traction when you are on a car tire in the rear, because when you lean over, that car tire, because it's flat, a motorcycle tire goes like this, and it rolls gradually, and when it's on the side of the tire, it will work with the motorcycle to have it go around the radius. A car tire, which is flat, if I can do this, if you go up onto the side of it, right, it wants to go back to the flat part of the tire. And that means that you're always having to put handlebar pressure to keep it from standing up. Right? So that uses traction, uses a lot of energy. So if you're doing a lot of cornering and stuff, and not a whole lot of straight up and down highway stuff, I'm talking 20,000 miles a year or more, because you'll get a lot of wear out of a car tire. You're really giving up, again, the risk and reward. You are adding risk. Is the reward really worth it? You got to ask yourself that, and that's for you dark-siders. But same with worn tires. We see this all the time. Is the false economy of trying to get that last 500 miles out of your tire that really needs to just be chucked. Now, the wear bars are the first indicator, but I usually end up replacing my tires before the wear bar is really exposed fully. And just understand, hey, it's not illegal. You can do it, but you're taking more of a risk, all right? Now, you're taking more of a risk when you're riding a tire like that in the rain, particularly. And riding in the rain is a risk. Now, today's a rainy day, and I'll ride in the rain. And when I'm on a trip, it rains, I ride, of course. Out on the racetrack, I ride. But I understand the limitations, and I understand I have to have the best equipment when I'm faced with the environment. The environment has changed. It has gotten riskier. So I have to make sure that my machinery and the tires I have and my attitude, it all is adjusted to the change in the environment's the risk level of the environment. Now, same with it riding at night. Riding at night, again, no judgment here, of course not. You ride at night, but understand the risks of that. Animals is the primary risk out where I live. But also, you think it's hard for drivers to discern a motorcycle coming toward them at an intersection during the day. Try to do it at night, when you have a single headlight, many of us do, and you don't have auxiliary lights. And again, if you ride at night a lot, then you do want to look into, installing more visibility at night, and the Denali lights are great. And by the way, Twisted Throttle sells those, and if you buy through my website, I do get a little affiliate fee. Click on any of the links on the website. Okay, here's a big one. This is one that I address every time when I'm with students, is going fast on straightaways. What's the point? Now, I understand going fast can be a lot of fun. You don't get a chance to do it, but when you get out away from town and you get out there and it's this long straightaway, it's really, really tempting to wick it up and go fast. But realistically, if you're missing out on the real advantage or the fun of riding a motorcycle, and that is the corners. If you're not all that happy about doing corners, then that's what you should work on. Because the straightaways are just sort of necessary parts of the road to get to the next corner. And if you think of it that way, then when you're on the straightaway, just chill. Now, this is a risk-reward thing. Is the reward great enough? Does it match or exceed the risk of getting stopped by the police or having something jump out in front of you? Because on straightaways, oftentimes is where you'll find side roads and an animal. But that's where the police hang out. It's because that's where people go faster than they should. In corners, they tend to think that like most car drivers, is that they kind of dawdle through them. So it's not really the place that they're going to hang out so often, unless it's a place where motorcycle riders show up on the weekend. and know that too. Just sort of have some local knowledge of where you're riding. You go down to Deals Gap and you're on a Saturday, you don't expect to not see police, because they know where to be at when. And same with even where I live on 116 on a Saturday. Don't be surprised if you see a cop come, around the corner. They're not stupid. So you have to be smart. So fast on straights, don't do it. Come out of the corners. You see a straightaway. Temptation is to keep it going, to keep your momentum going and your, the rhythm going. But try to resist that, because again, you're reducing the risk, and there's not a whole lot of reward. At least not from many people, not from me. And so then you go ahead and go faster in the corners. You get caught then by the cops or something. At least you're having fun. You're not just getting caught doing a stupid thing like going through town. That's something that drives me nuts. It's like through my little town here in Ashfield, it's 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, which is kind of generous for this town because there's a lot going on, even though it's a really remote town. Respect it. 30 miles an hour is no big deal. It's only a mile long, and then you're out, and then off you go.